willing would, if beaten, move for a new trial or appeal to a higher court, anything to keep up the fight. So he will grant us till December, which I am inclined to think will be ample time. It looks now, said Mr. Barton, producing a telegram, as though we might succeed in securing that evidence much sooner than we have anticipated. What do you think of that?" And he handed the dispatch to Mr. Sutherland. The face of the latter brightened as he glanced rapidly over the yellow sheet. "The dickens! McCabe has left the city!" he exclaimed. Mr. Barton bowed. "Which means," he said in reply, "that he has evidently struck the scent, and when he once starts on the trail, it is only a question of time, and usually not any great length of time either, before he runs his game to cover." "Well," ejaculated Mr. Sutherland, rubbing his hands together enthusiastically, "I, for one, want to be in at the death on this, for it will simply be the finest piece of work, the grandest denouement of any case that has ever come within my 20 years of legal experience." Mr. Barton smiled. "My brother is evidently of the same opinion with yourself," he said. "I received a cablegram from him to day, requesting me to inform him at once of the date set for the hearing, as he stated he would not, for a kingdom, fail of being present at the trial." With the announcement that the case of Mainwaring versus Mainwaring had been set for the opening of the December term of court, the public paused to take breath and to wonder at this unlooked-for delay, but preparations for the coming contest were continued with unabated vigor on both sides. Contrary to all expectations, Ralph Mainwaring, so far from objecting to the postponement of the case, took special pains to express his entire satisfaction with this turn of affairs. "It is an indication of conscious weakness on their part," he remarked with great complacency, as he and Mr. Whitney were dining at the club on the following day. "They have evidently discovered some flaw in their defense, which it will take some time to repair. I can afford to wait, however. My attorneys and experts will soon be here, and while our side could easily have been in readiness in a much shorter time, this, of course, will give us an opportunity for still more elaborate preparation, so that we will gain an immense advantage over them." "I suppose, Mr. Mainwaring," said one of his listeners, giving a quick side glance at his companions, "I suppose that during this interim a truce will be declared, and for the time being there will be a cessation of hostilities between the parties in interest, will there not?" "Sir!" roared Ralph Mainwaring, transfixing the speaker with a stare calculated to annihilate him. "I beg pardon, sir, I meant no offense," continued the irrepressible young American, ignoring the warning signals from his associates. "It only occurred to me that with such an immense advantage on your side, you could afford to be magnanimous and treat your opponent with some consideration." "I am not accustomed to showing magnanimity or consideration to any but my own equals," the other rejoined, with freezing dignity. "And the fact that my opponent, as you are pleased to designate him, is, for the present, allowed liberty to go and come at his pleasure, although under strict surveillance, is, in this case, sufficient consideration." "Harold Scott Mainwaring under surveillance? Incredible!" exclaimed one of the party in a low tone, while the first speaker remarked, "I was certainly unaware that the gentleman in question was to be regarded in the light of a suspected criminal." "It is to be presumed," said Ralph Mainwaring haughtily, stung by the tinge of irony in the other's tone, "that there are a number of points in this case of which people in general are as yet unaware, but upon which they are likely to become enlightened in the near future, when this person who has assumed such a variety of roles will be disclosed in his true light, not that of a suspected criminal merely, but of a condemned criminal, convicted by a chain of evidence every link of which has been forged by himself." There was an ominous silence as Ralph Mainwaring rose from the table, broken at last by an elderly gentleman seated at a little distance, who, while apparently an interested listener, had taken no part in the conversation. "Begging your pardon, Mr. Mainwaring, I would judge the charges which you would prefer against this young man to be unusually serious. May I inquire of their nature?" The words were spoken with utmost deliberation, but in the calm, even tones there was an implied challenge, which was all that was needed at that instant to fan Ralph Mainwaring's wrath into a flame. Utterly disregarding a cautionary glance from Mr. Whitney, he turned his monocle upon the speaker, glaring at him in contemptuous silence for a moment. "You have decidedly the advantage of me, sir, but allow me to say that the person under discussion has not only, with unheard of effrontery, publicly and unblushingly proclaimed himself as a blackmailer and knave, capable of descending to any perfidy or treachery for the purpose of favouring his own base schemes. But he has also, in his inordinate greed and ambition, unwittingly proved himself by his own statements and conduct to be a villain of the deepest dye. And I will say, furthermore, that if Harold Scott Mainwaring, as he styles himself, ends his days upon the gallows in expiation of the foul murder of Hugh Mainwaring, he will only have himself to thank, for his own words and deeds will have put the noose about his neck." Having thus expressed himself, Ralph Mainwaring, without waiting for reply, left the room, accompanied by Mr. Whitney. The latter made no comment until they were seated in the carriage and rolling down the avenue. Then he remarked casually, "I was surprised, Mr. Mainwaring, that you failed to recognize the gentleman who addressed you as you were leaving the table." "His face was somewhat familiar. I have met him, but I cannot recall when or where. I considered his tone decidedly offensive, however, and I proposed, whoever he might be, to give him to understand that I would brook no interference. Do you know him?" "I have never met him, but I know of him," the attorney replied, watching his client closely. "He is the Honourable J. Ponsonby Roget, Q.C. of London. I supposed, of course, that you knew him." "J. Ponsonby Roget, Queen's Counsel? Egad, I have met him, but it was years ago, and he has aged so that I did not recognize him. Strange," he added, visibly annoyed. "What the deuce is he doing in this country?" "That is just what no one is able to say," replied the attorney slowly. "He is stopping at the Waldorf with our friends, the English party, but whether as a guest or in a professional capacity, no one has been able to ascertain." "Zounds, man! Why did you not give me this information earlier?" "For the good and sufficient reason, Mr. Mainwaring, that I did not learn of the facts myself until within the last 2 hours. My attention was called to the gentleman as I entered the club. I assumed, of course, that you knew him, at least by sight, and when he addressed you I supposed for the instant that you were acquaintances." "But how came he at the club? None of the party from the Waldorf were with him?" "He was there as the especial guest of the Chief Justice Parmalee of the Supreme Court, the gentleman on his left. Judge Parmalee spent much of his life in London, and the two are particular friends." "Well, it's done and can't be undone, and I don't know that I regret it," Ralph Mainwaring remarked sullenly. "If he chooses to identify himself with that side of the case, he is at liberty to do so, but he has my opinion of his client gratis." Mr. Whitney made no reply, and the drive was concluded in silence. Meanwhile, Ralph Mainwaring had no sooner left the club than a chorus of exclamations, protests, and running comments arose on all sides. "Harold Scott Mainwaring, the murderer of Hugh Mainwaring? That is carrying this farce beyond all bounds." "If he cannot get possession of the property in any other way, he will send the new heir to the gallows, eh?" "He will attempt it, too. He is desperate," said one. "He may make it pretty serious for the young fellow," said another thoughtfully. "You remember, by his own statements, he was the last person who saw Hugh Mainwaring alive. In fact, he was in his library within a few moments preceding his death. And after all that has been brought to light, it's not to be supposed that he had any great affection for his uncle." "What is this, gentlemen?" said a reporter briskly, appearing on the scene, notebook in hand. "Any new developments in the Mainwaring case?" "Yes, a genuine sensation," shouted 2 or 3 voices. "Gentlemen, attention a moment," said a commanding voice outside, and an instant later a tall, well-known form entered. "The ubiquitous Mr. Sutherland," laughingly announced a jovial young fellow, standing near the entrance. "Sutherland, how is this?" demanded one of the elder gentlemen. "Have you a private battery concealed about your person with invisible wires distributed throughout the city, that you seem to arrive at any and every spot just in the nick of time?" "That is one of the secrets of the profession, Mr. Norton, not to be revealed to the uninitiated," replied the attorney, while a quick glance flashed between himself and the Queen's Counsel. "There is one thing, gentlemen," he continued with great dignity, "to which I wish to call your attention, particularly you gentlemen of the press. I am aware of the nature of the sensation of which you made mention a moment ago, but I wish it distinctly understood that it is to be given no publicity whatever. The name of my client is not to be bandied about before the public in connection with any of Ralph Mainwaring's imputations or vilifications, for the reason that they are wholly without foundation. We are thoroughly cognizant of that gentleman's intentions regarding our client, and we will meet him on his own ground. In the coming contest, we will not only establish beyond all shadow of doubt our client's sole right and title to the Mainwaring estate, but we will, at the same time, forever refuse